Welcome back, Year 5. In today's writing lesson, we are going to be drafting our stories that we started planning on Monday. Now, remember, on Monday, we were following the structure of stories that are how the blank got its blank. So, based on the plan that you wrote, today you are going to draft your narrative, and you're also going to aim to include relevant description. We've spent time on description in the past, so we want to beef up our stories, make them more interesting to read by including relevant descriptions. I want to start by reviewing my plan. This is my planning sheet. I decided I wanted to write the story How the Agouti Got Its Big Booty. My characters are Gogo the Agouti, who is mischievous, short, and round. I made a little change. Instead of having him short and slim, I made him short and round. The other character is Mr. Joe, who owns a property with lots of mango trees, and he hates Gogo. The story takes place on Mr. Joe's property a long time ago, and there's the sweet smell of juicy mangoes in the air. The big problem in the plot, or the plot is just how the story develops, is that Gogo steals Mr. Joe's mangoes, Joe sets a trap, Gogo gets stuck in a fence when trying to escape. So that's my rough outline of what's going to happen in my story. For the problem to be resolved, Gogo is going to squeeze out of that fence. He's going to get out just in time, but his body gets squished, so he is slim in the front with a round bottom. Now he only steals mangoes in the early morning. I had said at the end of my planning sheet that a description I wanted to include is that the mango trees stood tall and majestic like silent giants. Now, that box down there is just to help me incorporate some nice description that might have popped into my head, but if I'm not careful, it could float away and I'd forget about it. So I jotted it down there so that when I'm ready to write, I have it right there to include. So, what I'm going to do now is show you how I would go about writing my story step by step. For a story like this, I'm going to want to start by describing the setting. That's what happened in the example story that we read, so I'm going to do the same thing. So this is the opening to my story. I started by describing the setting. A long time ago, on the property of a hard-working farmer named Mr. Joe, mango trees stood tall and majestic like silent giants. Every year they would bear an abundance of their delicious fruit, which filled the air with the sweet smell of juicy mangoes. All right, well, I don't think that's a bad start. My next step, now that I've set the scene, I'm going to introduce the characters. Mr. Joe worked hard every day to make sure his trees stayed healthy so he could sell the fruit to provide for his family. But every day during the mango season, Mr. Joe would discover that any of the golden fruit that had fallen to the ground while he wasn't looking had been chewed up by his nemesis. That darned Gogo! I'll get him one of these days. Gogo was an agouti. He was round like a soccer ball and brown like a kiwi, with two sparkling black eyes. Whenever he could, he would sneak out of his hole on Mr. Joe's property and take a bite out of every sweet mango he could find, before the birds in the trees yelled, "Go! Go!" because Mr. Joe was coming. That's how he got his name. Now, notice before I move on that when I introduced my characters, I spent some time describing them, and I only described what's important about them. Mr. Joe's personality is important, but the way he looks isn't, so I didn't spend any time describing how he looks. On the other hand, the way Gogo looks is extremely important because in the end he's going to look different, and that's what this story is all about. So I took the time to describe how he looks at the start of the story. Now I'm going to move on to developing the problem and the plot. One day, Mr. Joe had had enough. He built a fence around his property in the night when Gogo was asleep. Then he waited for him to wake up and try to escape his property. The fence would trap him, and finally Mr. Joe would be able to catch the little beast. In the morning when the sun rose, Gogo climbed out of his burrow and sniffed the air. It was filled with the delicious scent of mangoes. He followed his nose to the nearest fallen fruit. He was so focused on eating that he didn't notice the new chain link fence. Before I move on, please notice that I didn't rush through this process. I took time to describe how the problem arose and to describe what the characters do. That way it doesn't feel like I'm trying to jump through the story and just get it over with. Also, I do want to point out I have a small spelling mistake on this page. If you can find what the spelling mistake is, comment down below, and I might tell your parents that you deserve a little treat. As he began to munch, he heard the birds begin to cry out, "Go! Go!" He opened his eyes and saw Mr. Joe hiding behind a tree with a big machete. Without wasting a second, Gogo ran towards the neighboring property where he knew he could hide. But when he looked, he saw a big chain link fence in his way. He ran anyway and tried his hardest to squeeze under the new fence. Mr. Joe was still running towards him, waving his machete. This is what we call the climax of the story. It's the most intense part. It's when the problem is at its worst. So the next step is to resolve the problem. So I'm going to move on to my resolution. Gogo didn't give up. He squeezed and he squeezed and he squeezed. His little round body got pressed and squished out as he forced his way under the fence. All of his roundness got squeezed down to his bottom. And then, pop! The chain link fence gave way and Gogo was able to escape, just as Mr. Joe swiped at him with his machete. Gogo was safe. So as you can see here, I resolved the problem. Gogo managed to get away in time. But in my resolution, you can see how I've described how Gogo ended up changing shape. And that's the whole point of this story, how the agouti got its big booty. So what I'm going to do now is wrap up my story and basically highlight the whole purpose of the story to tell the tale of how the agouti got its big booty. After that day, Gogo looked different. He was no longer round like a soccer ball. Now he had a slim face and body with a big booty where all his fat got squished down. He was so embarrassed by his new shape that he would hide during the day and only come out when it was dawn or dusk and the light wasn't bright enough for others to see him well. And that is the story of how the agouti got its big booty. Well, as you can see, I wrapped it up. I made sure that I highlighted the whole purpose of the story, that I was telling the tale of how the agouti got its big booty. Again, you might have noticed I had a little mistake on this page. If you see it, here's another opportunity to comment down below. Alright, so I walked you through the steps of writing your story. Now let's look at those steps all together. These are the 5 steps you should follow when writing your story. First, you need to introduce the setting. Be descriptive. Try to use similes. Step 2, introduce the characters. Again, be descriptive and highlight their inner traits. That's what's going to be important. If you don't know what inner traits are, you need to watch our read aloud video from yesterday. Step 3, develop the problem and the plot. Don't rush. So you need to map out the events that take place in the story. First, next, then, after, but of course we use better transition words than those. But you get the picture. You need to show the order of events in the story. Step 4, resolve the problem. Again, don't rush. Ensure that it makes sense. If you rush the solution to the problem, your story is going to sound really stupid. That's always what happens. So you have to take your time and make sure that the solution matches the problem and that it's realistic. Finally, step 5, you just need to wrap it up. You can look at how I wrapped up my story and model your conclusion or your ending after mine. Alright, so to sum up what your independent task is, today you're actually going to write your story. On your schedule, you'll notice that it's due tomorrow, Thursday, but I want you to start writing it today and you can finish it up tomorrow before you send me a picture. Make sure you follow the 5 steps we just went through. Use paragraphs to structure your piece. It shouldn't just be one big chunk of writing in your book. I should see it split into sections. And as always, you can support your work with illustrations. Keep it neat, keep it tidy. Send a picture to me when you're done, and as always, your 5, stay safe and I'll see you soon.